Good morning. My name is Greg Davis, and I'm here with CBS ArcSafe, and we're going to discuss today the remote switch operator family of control boxes. We have an RSO-I, an RSO-III, RSO-III-D, and RSO-IV for you here today to go over. The first one we're going to start with is our RSO-I AR. When we first started making actuators a little over 12 years ago, somebody said, I need something for a breaker control switch. I need something for a push button. I need something for Westinghouse Cutler hammer, Eaton Cutler hammer, Advantage Freedom 5-star. This thing's got like 5 different names, but it's the short little handle that looks like this. It's great. I need something for an Allen Bradley. I need something for a GE limit amp family, okay? And so these are all on-off functionality, if you notice. And so I can use different actuators with one control box and make all of these systems work. The difference between this, just to cover it real quick, and our Martech line is, they're made for just one specific function, like a push button or a control switch. And so if you have something in that line of our equipment that we offer, it's going to only be able to operate one thing, instead of having a family of actuators where I may need to operate several things with a single control box. The RSO-I AR can operate over 300 different actuators, whether it's molded case circuit breakers, whether it's push buttons, whether it's control switches, motor control centers, medium voltage switches like HVL, HVLCC, GE, or PowerCon load break switches. All of those can be operated with one RSO-I AR. Now, I keep saying this thing AR, and what is AR? AR is what we're going to look at that's unique on the RSO-I today, and the reason we make it universal is because you may wind up needing that AR functionality down the road. The first actuator we made with AR functionality was actually the RSA-II HD, a heavy button, push button actuator, and it was meant to, the first breaker that we had a customer ask for it was the General Electric Magnablast breakers, because they're like, I don't want to have to use my bang stick and stand right in front of this beast and be able to push that push button on that breaker when it doesn't want to open. Okay, so we've got the RSA-II HD to answer that call from the electrical industry. It's wound up being used on other medium voltage breakers like a GE Power Vac or a Powell Vac or other things like that, which require a stout push to be able to open. So looking at the RSO-I, Brian, I'm going to tilt the box here for a second just to show what it shows here. You've got the power switch, you've got the LED, which indicates our battery strength. 3 bars indicates, or 3 green lights indicates 24 volts in the system. You've got your trip and your close, and then you have your AR switch functionality. For the RSA-II HD, we're going to switch the functionality to the on position. And now when we go to push the button and operate the actuator, it operates, and then when we release it, it automatically retracts. And that's what AR functionality is. So I'm going to take the actuator off of the panel now and let everybody just see that. Okay. If I switch back to another actuator which doesn't require AR, I have to turn that functionality off. This would be for a small motor control center, Square D Model 5, which we don't have a box here to show you today, but this would simply mount on the panel, and now we would go, whoops, wait a second. Okay. There we go. Now you can see that it operates normal in that function now. we can use the RSO-I to trip and close a Westinghouse DS breaker. Now, one of the things that you're going to see is that if I have AR on, and we always encourage people to check the device before they put it on the breaker. Right now I have AR off, and the reason I'm holding it like this is I want you to watch the solenoids and what happens if I move the AR on. Okay, so here it is. I haven't touched any of the operating buttons to trip or close, but if I flip AR, all of a sudden the close solenoid actuates by itself. And we don't want that to happen when you go to put this on a breaker. So always check to make sure that it's operating in the proper position. And if you notice the fine print right here on the side of the actuator, it says, do not use AR. So now we can go mount this on the front of the breaker. Breaker's currently closed. So now we can trip the breaker. One of the nice features about an RSO-I, we do have an optional radio remote that if we wanted to, we can control things from 100 meters away with wireless. Okay, so since this actuator is not capable of charging the breaker, I'm going to just take this off real quick and I'll charge it. I'll place it back on there, and this time I'm going to use the wireless remote to close and trip the breaker. And that's the basis of what we can do with an RSO-I. We can, again, control over 300 devices with this one control box. Now, just like anything else, there is maintenance required, and it's actually fairly simple. Okay? Let me just take this off. So
It might be easier to show it on the camera too, if you're talking about this batteries.
well, I'm going to, give me a second, because what we're going to just go over real quick. Okay, so to do the maintenance here on an RSO-I, you would have it turned off. You would remove these two small Phillips head screws. That doesn't take much, just a simple small Phillips head screwdriver. You take these two out, and when you lift this out, it's going to expose two 12-volt batteries that are held under a battery strap inside of there. There is a placard inside on top of the battery strap for you to check the voltage on these batteries. They need to be checked annually. They should be maintaining a minimum of 12-volt charge per battery when the unit is plugged in, or not when the unit is unplugged. If they're not maintaining 12 volts, they need to be replaced. The batteries are the power to do this. Now, you can have batteries that are holding 12 volts, and if they're losing that charge fairly quickly, you need to understand that batteries over time are losing their ampacity. And the ampacity is the real power of the system. So these things have a recommendation to be changed every 2 to 3 years. We've seen them last longer, and we've seen customers kill them inside of 6 months from decycled drains. So when you do not have the RSO in use, you are expected to have it turned off and plugged in a good environment so that it's not going to be left to have the batteries decay. Batteries will decay due to heat and due to cold if they're not being maintained in a proper manner.
Lid can be closed as well.
So those are things to watch out for with these. It has a smart cycle charger in there, but you're not going to have enough power coming off the charger to be able to operate an actuator and have the ampacity to move that big motor on a big actuator. So don't try and operate this if the batteries are not holding a charge. They're easy enough to replace. It just takes about 5 minutes of your time. I've bought these in markets around the world, so whether you're at Batteries Plus in America or whether you're in a shopping mall in the Middle East, I have not had a problem getting these types of batteries. These are 12 volt. We use the 8 amp hour. You can use a 9 amp hour in the system if you want. That's acceptable. UB1280, UB1290 is the other reference that people will know these batteries by when you're going to shop for them. So the next one we're going to move on to now is the RSO-III. And people go, why do you need an RSO-III? You go from a 1 to a 3, and the thing that I'm going to show you is we're going to look first at a historical RSO-III here. Okay? And some of these are still in use. Okay? And you'd have T1, T2, and you'd have your cycles up here. And then if you want to cut over to camera 2, Brian, to show them an RSO-3D now. Now you've got a nice clean digital display. And you say, why did you switch from this old analog thing with pots and everything to the digital? And about the second year we were doing this, we ran into a square D SE breaker. And if you were to look at our old system here, you could only get 10 cycles for charging a breaker. A square D SE breaker takes 24 cycles to charge. So you'd have to come over here and you'd have to hit the charge close button 3 different times, and it would go da, 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 and it'd go through the 3 sets of cycles before the breaker spring was finally charged so that you could close or trip the breaker. So we said, we've got to fix this. The other thing we found out was, as we were going through this, we had to build in automatic return into the RSO-III also, because now when we're dealing with things like a Siemens Alice Chalmers LA breakers or a Siemens RL breaker, you have to be able to have automatic return on the closing portion. There's other breakers where you have to have automatic return on the trip portion. So these are things that we ran into and had to build functionality into the systems as you, the customers, brought needs to us so that we could meet those needs in your remote racking and remote switching problems. So now we're going to look at this on a Pringle switch actuator. This is an RSA-135. You're going to see the motor here and you're going to see the actuator here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this around now and you can watch things happen. So we've got limit switches here for limiting the travel, and then we've got the functionality of the push button right here to be able to operate that. So this requires AR to be on for the trip. So we're going to go to camera 2 now, and we're going to turn on and set AR. And this has got lots of functionality in here, and I'm just going to run through this as we go. So you have to hold down the reset and cycles button to start with, and it's going to boot up, and then it's going to say normal. So we want it to be for, you can have it for closed here, or trip, or closed trip, and so we want it for just the trip. And to set that, we're going to hit the cycles button, and it's going to say IRO now, and now we're going to hit the reset button, and now it remembers that we want that functionality to be present for just the trip.
When we talk about the ARO, it's to...
ARO lets you know that you have selected automatic return. So you'll notice that we've got a 3-pin and a 4-pin. We try and make this what we say is idiot resistant, so that somebody doesn't try and hook the motor connector up to the actuator. So it's just got a twist on knurl on one and then a keyed alignment on the other one. Ben, did you set the cycles on this one already?
Yes, it is 1 cycle. The T1 and T2 are both at 5.
Okay. All right. So somebody will ask the question, why do you have it labeled charge, close, trip, and jog? Okay. When we came up with these, you have the older breakers like a K-line breaker. You just pull the sucker down on the 2000 amp and below, and it closes at the bottom of the stroke. You've got a GEAK GEAK2, and the breakers in those families where you move the handle up to the right, bring it down, and it closes at the bottom of the stroke. So that's the reason it's called charge close. And so if it's only going to be charging a spring, then that's what it's going to do, and it's going to operate like on an RSA-12B or RSA-12A for us. It would actually pull down the handle on this breaker here and charge the spring, and then you have the separate buttons for closing and tripping. Okay, so for this, we're now going to hit charge close once. And that would have actually closed the switch. Now we hit the trip, and we're going to let the end cycle clear. So we're going to hit reset there. And now we hit the trip. And that's that part of the functionality.
That's the auto retract.
That's the auto retract feature, okay? Some of the things people say, just this is a question we have every once in a while, people say, is charging a breaker working with energized gear something I need to be worried about? You know, I've never had a breaker close when I got to the bottom of a charging stroke. And so they'll think maybe they need that, maybe they don't. What we have seen, I haven't seen it that much domestically. I've seen it a couple of times. I've seen it more internationally where somebody's got a worn charging mechanism and they get to the bottom of the last charging stroke and all of a sudden the breaker closes by itself. That is not normal behavior. And the real answer that you need there is breaker maintenance. But if you've got aging gear and you want to keep your people safe, then the actuators we have that do charge, close, and trip can work to help keep your operators safe and out of harm's way, so they're not standing there in front of that breaker when it closes and they're not expecting it to do so. The last thing, real quick, what I want to cover is just the difference between the batteries on a RSO and one of our RSK kits. There are a couple of different kinds of batteries that we run into with our RSKs. This is the standard controller for most of the smaller remote switching kits that we offer. And on the back, you simply would take off the base. This slides off, and there's 8 AA batteries in there that you would simply have to replace all of them at one time. Okay? And so you'd want to check those just as per the directions with the RSK to make sure that those are all operating and doing what they're supposed to. Okay, I'm going to move this out now and we're going to get to the
small card.
Yep. Last but not least is the RSO-IV, and the first RRS-3 system, which is a single breaker racking device that we came up with, was the RRS-3-DS. And we came up with it because people said, I only got DS breakers, I need something to be able to operate these. So what you're going to see is the same face here for a control current, or our current control module that we have with the standard RS-I, RS-II type setups. The 5.0 that you saw is telling you it's 5.0 software right there. So when it first comes on, it's going to tell you what version of software is in there. Okay? We can check what our install value is at 5.1 and our remove value at 3.4. We work to determine those values based off of the breaker you're going to be operating. So until 2012, no manufacturer put it in the specifications. How much torque does it take to rack my breaker? So we had to work to determine that through uses of torque wrenches and looking at tools and figuring this stuff out for ourselves. And we built our tables so that we knew what was acceptable torque levels based upon the manufacturer, the amp frame size, the mass of the breaker. Those are the variables that go into helping us determine how much force it should take to rack your breakers. And then based upon the motors and the gearboxes that we use, whether it's an RS-I or an RS-III system, then we adjust the current control module settings to make that happen. There's other functionality that's built into here. We have an interlocking capability, and that lets us set whether it's going to latch or not, and that's a more in-depth conversation. And when you purchase this and your breakers need that, then we'll go over that with you in the training so that you understand why you need to use that part of the functionality. For most people, it won't be a factor.
Maybe touch on like master pack NWs for the push button interlock defeat or an add back
Yes.
to the lever.
So the other options that come with this are, you notice that there's two holes here, and there's additional buttons that we can put on things, and those are based upon whether or not you have an interlock. So on a master pack NW, down at the base of it, for each position that you have to push in and reset a little white plastic tab so that it allows you to progress from connect to test to disconnect, or vice versa going back in. And so we have a solenoid with what we call interlock defeat control that allows you to defeat that white button and then progress to the next portion of the racking operation. So those are things that we've built in for functionality for other types of breakers. So with the RRS-III for the DS, what you have to do is you have to push down the trip button to hold down the access to this. The breaker does have to be in the open position, so we can see that that's there already. And then we simply slide this, and you can see that this is going to sit on the handle, so that's going to give us torsional resistance there for the handle. And we're going to use one magnet here to hold this on the face. So once you've got it situated up here, then what you're going to work to do is index it to get it onto the drive shaft right there, and then just rotate the handle one time. And always make sure you're following your safety rules and that you're going to be outside of the arc flash hazard boundary. While we're doing this in a conference room, if I'm actually doing this with the radio remote now, again, I can do this from up to 100 meters away with a clean radio path. If your breakers are located in a metal building and you have to be outside, you're going to have to prop the door open so that you get rid of the Faraday cage effect of your steel building, and you can see that you still have a good operational link between this and the base to be able to rack the breaker safely. So we're in the install position, so we're going to go to remove. We just hold it down momentarily. And that stops it right there. Now, some of the things that I will just give you a note real quick. When you're dealing with these DS breakers, the indicator on here is a metal tab. And it's how it was installed that indicates the close, test, and disconnect position. And to be honest, sometimes that may be off just based upon how that thing was bent. I've seen it domestically and internationally where I've looked at a breaker and I'm like, the tab looks like it's a little bit off. And I would take a permanent marker and just mark where it was showing disconnect and then where it was showing connect. Because the guys would be looking at it when we got done racking, and you could tell that the unit had gone through the cycle where the natural progression is it goes along, it's moving, the force goes up because you would either hit the bus or you have shutters open and then get on the bus, and then it stops. And they go, hey, is that normal? Is that right? And the answer is yes, it is. Okay? But until you've actually played with this stuff a little bit and get used to using it, get familiar with it, you're questioning how does this work because you've just been doing this by hand up until this point. The RRS-3 or RS-I is going to provide a smoother torque, and you can monitor that torque as you rack this breaker. And the more you rack it, the more familiar you're going to be with this. Remember, it should always take more force to rack a breaker in than it should take to rack a breaker out. These are normal things, and we've actually had customers help identify bad cubicles and breakers that need maintenance when they see that it takes more force to get a breaker off than it does to get one on the bus. So now to put the breaker back on the bus and do install.
One second, let's watch the camera too to
Okay.
actually see the current control module, and let's go over our set points again.
Okay, so to just the easiness of setting this, just for everybody's, okay, so we've got this set at remove right now, and if I want to bring that number up, I simply hold down the up button. If I want to bring it back down, I hold down the down button, and you'll see that it stays right there, and the same for install.
Right, I'd like to see the max current, so that whenever it reaches that 5.1 amperage, we see that the current control module senses it and then it shuts off.
So for max current, I can actually watch, and it's going to just monitor the max current. You're going to see this little button flashing right here. So now if I hit the install, 1.1 is all that it's using right now as it starts to go in. Now you'll probably see a slight peak over 5.1, but when it gets to 5.1, it's going to command the shutoff. .3, boom, 5.4. And one of the things to understand is this. We can, this one tool can rack everything from an 800 amp breaker up to a 4,000 amp breaker. So it's made to rack the full family of DS breakers. If you need further information, please, you can contact us at info@cbsarcsafe.com or 1-877-472-3389. We can schedule an on-site demo. Understand that our demo trucks don't carry everything. They carry a simple cross-section of the equipment. You can always send us pictures again at info@cbsarcsafe.com and give us your contact information. We've got that through our web form for you to give us your basic information and send us pictures, and we will work to help you address what your needs are. The demonstration is free without any obligation. We've done these all around the U.S. and continue to do them. We have our affiliates up in the Northeast, so Circuit Breaker Sales Northeast. They work the New England area. We've got people up in the Western United States, Western Electrical Services, that work to cover that area. But contact us with your questions and we will work to answer them. If you have suggestions or other products that you'd like to see, please let us know. One of the things to understand is while we make over 800 products today, they're not all listed in the catalog. And the reason for that is because when we put out a catalog at the end of 2019, it took us 5 months to get that done. In that 5 months, we had developed 20 new products. And in the meantime, between the start of 2020 and now, we've developed about another 30 new products. We develop things at a rate of almost 1 new product a week, depending upon what's going on, because somebody like you needs something. So if you don't see something in our catalog, don't be afraid to ask us about new products. This is what we do to help keep you and the electrical industry safe.
Just open it up for questions.
Any questions?
We'll leave it open for a couple minutes, Greg.
Okay.
Just maybe till 11:02 or so. Does anybody rent these devices?
Does anybody rent the devices? Generally not. And what I'll explain is this: is we have most people find out that they want to keep them, and so the needs for you. So let's say you're an electrical contractor. You work with a lot of different facilities. Do you want to have a semi-trailer that's loaded with one of everything that we make, or do you want to have your end user at the facility purchase that equipment and have it available for you there at their facility? Because you're getting it for them. So we do have some electrical contractors that purchase our equipment, and they have certain things that they keep universally on their trucks to use, and then they go and they buy specific things for specific customers and leave those in those locations because those address the specific needs of the end users.
Anybody else? And if not, we'll.
Any other questions? If not, I would like to thank everybody again. Again, 1-877-472-3389 or info@cbsarcsafe.com.
Do we have written recommended PM inspections for these devices?
The actual question, okay, the question is, do we have recommended PM inspections for the devices? Generally with a remote switch actuator, what you would do is you would look to see that it has been dropped, like somebody's not like let it fall down 2 flights of stairs and then wants to still try and use it. Or with the RSOs, the question is, are you checking the batteries? The batteries are the big things that you need to check on the RSOs. We've not had, other than every once in a while somebody may break a switch or something on one, we haven't had really any problems with those. We've replaced probably a dozen chargers in 12 years. But the batteries are the one thing that you need to be cognizant of, that need to be checked annually for the health of the system. So the batteries are the big things. There's recommendations and troubleshooting in the back of the manual, but I will tell you, history's shown the batteries are the one thing you want to keep an eye on, and about every year, check them, notate it that you've done that, and then if they're not holding 12 volts, just replace them. Don't try and use them if they're not holding a charge. Anything else, Ben?
That's any routine torque testing needing for the devices? So maybe go into the torque of the RS-3s, maybe some of the stop limits on the RSAs and stuff like that.
The question came about with torque limits. So just to talk real quick, if we're looking at an RS-3 device, we have played with the breakers, so we give you what are a recommended set of settings so that you know what should be used. Now, the RS-3 systems actually have 2 protections. It's got the electronic protection of the current control module here. I'm going to take off the RS-3 here from the breaker here. And we actually have a Perfortorque clutch here, a mechanical clutch that we set just slightly higher than the value that we're going to use on the current control module. And we do that because we know the force, the maximum force, as we've done this working with a lot of breakers in the DS family and other families, to determine what is the peak force, and we'll set this just slightly higher than that number. So you don't run into the case where, and I love these guys, so I won't tell you the name of the facility, but there were 2 guys at a facility. On their helmets, they had the names Neanderthal and Jughead. And I couldn't make this up. And they said that if something required 10 foot-pounds to put in, Neanderthal could use 80. And nobody else could get it back out after Neanderthal put it on. Well, things would break routinely because a lot more force was used than what was required. We look at these things as mechanical systems. Our chief scientist and CEO, Finley Ledbetter, is an electrical engineer. Finley hired a bunch of mechanical engineers to work on these systems because we look at this as a mechanical system. So we work to calculate the torques. We work to calculate the forces. And by doing so, we pick the motor for a remote switch actuator that's going to have the right amount of torque with the gearbox that's on it to be able to do this and not try and break things. Because we don't want to be breaking any equipment. We want to be able to have things work as it's supposed to. And if something's not going, you're not trying to force it past what we've worked to calculate are the forces that are required to operate that in the normal operating range. And we're helping you with our sister companies like Circuit Breaker Sales in Gainesville or others to get replacement parts when you need them for some of this older, quote, sometimes obsolete switchgear. So you say, somebody hasn't made this in a long time. Well, gee whiz, I can get you in touch with people who can get you the parts to get your equipment serviced and get it back up online so that it's going to be operating normally. Because more force is not the answer. Good service is.
Just thank everyone and we'll go to the video.
Okay, one more time, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in today. Again, send us your questions at info@cbsarcsafe.com or call us at 1-877-472-3389. Thank you again.